Hello everyone, Kent.Bressler here. I want to welcome you to Kent's Kidney Stories. During our time together over these podcasts, I'd like to discuss kidney disease. I'd like to tell you about my journey as a transplant patient, but also talk about dialysis, kidney donation, and just about anything else that might be of interest. Kent's Kidney Stories, a podcast endorsed and sponsored by kidneysolutions.org. Hello everyone, this is Kent.Bressler and we're going to do some podcasting. I have a great guest that I just met this morning, and I'm really looking forward to talking to her because she's from my stomping grounds up in North Dakota. Let's start this session out with a prayer. We always want to do that because the Lord's in our hearts. Lord God, may we be grateful for our lot and compassionate toward all those who are suffering every kind of distress at this difficult time. May we hold back nothing from you and hasten to be ministers of prayer and mercy, like the disciples of him who went about doing good in times of need. We ask this in your prayerful name, our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. This morning, depending on where you are when you listen to this, I'm going to talk with Becky Ronkowski, who is a AAKP member and ambassador, and we're going to get right to the meat of the subject. Becky, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning, Kent. I'm very, very good today.
I want to thank you for coming on. We talked a little bit before we started about where you are. You're in North Dakota. Give me a little background of your condition, your kidney walk, your kidney journey. Kind of tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, I'm happy to share that with you. I'm going to just fill you in a little bit. Yes, in Grand Forks, North Dakota, and I'm married and 3 children. They are all grown now. But when we started this kidney journey of ours, it was 1997. And our city, some of you might be familiar with this, our city had just had a catastrophic flood. And the whole town was evacuated. We're right along the Red River that flows north to Winnipeg and further north. And we had this, it was terrible. Our home is about a block and a half off the river. We're not directly on the river, but about a block and a half. So we had this flood, and following the flood, I was complaining, and probably for a few months before that, in maybe January, February of 97, I complained or stated my concern to my husband and my doctor about the fact that my feet were swelling so much. And my doctor thought that because I was a second grade teacher and was on my feet all day long, that it might just be that. And he said, I just don't believe that there's anything else going on. So along comes the flood. I'm dealing with these swollen feet, and then I start developing really, really bad headaches. Headaches so that I really couldn't a couple of days get out of bed. I needed the room dark. I needed pressure on my head to try to alleviate pain. My doctor believed I was suffering from migraine headaches. And so he was treating me with Imatrix. I also was taking a therapeutic dose of Advil. I had tried Tylenol, it wasn't doing anything. And so I switched to some Advil. And again, I'll just say that I have never been anybody who is like to take a lot of anything. And so my husband and I knew that I was in some pain if I was taking Advil. we are evacuated from our home. At that point, as we are trying to move things out of our house to save as much as we can, I'm noticing that I feel short of breath. And that was unusual for me too, because I'm very physically active and had always worked out. But I contribute it to the fact that I'm under stress at that point, and I'm very anxious. We had no idea if we were going to have a house to come back to or not. Move ahead, we finally get back into our home. I am still not feeling well at all. We get into the summer, and I wake up one morning and my eyes are basically swollen shut. My husband said, I think you must have gotten a bite from something during the middle of the night. So we're thinking, yeah, maybe there was a little insect that did it. Well, then this headache business. And I just said to my husband, I think I need to go in and this isn't right. This just isn't right. So we have some lab work done. And a few days later, my doctor calls and he says, are you okay? And I said, well, am I? And he said, well, I think they got your lab work mixed up. He said, I want to repeat it. He said, because Becky, I think I'm looking at like an 81-year-old woman's lab work. He said, this has to be a mistake. And he started listing many things that he was seeing on this. So we went back the next day, redid the lab work, and it was exactly the same.
Oh.
They immediately put me in ICU. At that time, my blood pressure was nuts. They thought I was going to have a stroke. The nephrologist that was called in at that point, because at this point, I only had a general practitioner because I had always been very, very healthy. No underlying health conditions, nothing, just nothing at all. And the nephrologist that was called in had prepared my husband. He said, your wife is very, very sick. And he said, we're going to do everything we can here. He said, but I just want you to know she's in trouble. At that point, I believe my kidney function had dropped to 13% without me even knowing it. And so I was in ICU for about 7 days. And the first thing that they wanted to do, of course, was to see if they could bring that blood pressure down because it was dangerously high. And that worked. I mean, he could get that back under control. And so that was kind of the beginning of our whole thing. That's when we found out that I was in kidney failure. Otherwise, we had no inclination that I was in distress like that. We thought I was having migraine headaches, and it just had been missed.
I want to ask you a big question here. That period of time was roughly how many years from the time that you started having these headaches until the time the swelling in your feet? And then
that had probably been about a year prior to this 97 thing. Okay. But really came to be when, this whole flood mess came upon us. So yeah. I don't know if it was just the stress of all of that adding to the physical condition or not, but it had been about that long.
Yeah. Okay. So blood pressure, your GP never found that you had elevated, you weren't treated for high blood pressure early on?
I had never been treated for high blood pressure. Looking back, our first baby was an extremely big kid. He was almost 10 pounds.
Oh, my.
Yeah. And I gained an incredible amount of weight with that pregnancy. And I wonder if there wasn't something that,
some connection.
We can all go back and think, well, maybe. I don't know, but we do wonder about that.
Yeah. See, because people that are listening now, they're wondering, now, how could they let that go for so long? But I'm going to tell you what, you don't know, right? You just don't know. But there are signs and symptoms all the way along. Did you get biopsy? Did they do
Yeah,
a
I
biopsy?
did.
Okay.
I
What
did. While I was in the ICU for those 7 days at the start of all of that,
Sure.
The nephrologist that was called in then to work with me, he did a biopsy, and glomerulonephritis, just the hardening of those nephrons, and yeah, I was sick. It was nothing genetic. Nobody else in our family had anything at all. When he first saw me, and knew what my lab situation was, this nephrologist, I do have to say that his bedside manner was a little bit shocking to my husband and I, because he came flying in the room and he started asking my husband what drugs I was on, meaning something big time.
He must have been from South Dakota.
My husband just said, she's got to be on something. What's she on? And my husband said, listen, the only thing she's taken is Advil for headaches. And as my husband said, Advil, the nephrologist kind of spun around and he said, what'd you say? And my husband said, she's been taking Advil for this. And he said, okay. And then he did some more, looking and digging around. But yes, he biopsied then. And
so essentially you have FSGS or some type of form of it, just like I do.
Yes.
That's and what you explained to me is a similar thing that happened to me. It takes a while to get where you are in failure. Okay. It just doesn't happen overnight with FSGS. It's a pretty long process. And if you go back, which is a good thing, because you want to go back and look where you think it really started. It usually starts years before you get to where you're at. Years, not months, not weeks. It's a pretty slow and insidious. And people just think it's from this or that, or, like you said, my feet are just swollen from standing them on too long. And, and then I get this thing in my eye, and, there's a multitude of things you go through, right?
Right.
And then all of a sudden you show up and your kidney function is gone, and
that's right.
And then they, then they have to go back and do a historic look.
I was just about to mention, Kent, that as an elementary school teacher, 1 year I got sick a lot, and a couple of times with strep, and found out that I had a child in my classroom who never was sick herself, but she was a strep carrier. And when I got sick, I was really, really sick. And I know that my doctors too looked at that and wondered if having strep contributed to some of the kidney stuff also. Sure. So you're right. There are just so many things along the way that happened that we just don't know about and how they affected.
Let me ask you about the Advil.
Yes.
How much Advil did they kind of start leaning then towards that? Maybe you had some damage from the Advil.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Even though I was, like I mentioned, I have never had ever, or I am not a pill
taker. Yeah.
I just never have been. And my parents can vouch for that, because when I was little, if they tried to get me to take anything, I'd put up just a stinking fit and didn't want to take anything. But anyway, I was taking the therapeutic dose of Advil. Looked at the bottle. It said you are allowed, what is it, 4 a day? I don't even know.
Yeah. Every 6 hours.
We don't have it in our house, of course, anymore.
Yeah.
But that's what I was following, and I would do that. And yes, what doctors believe is that I had that kidney stuff going on.
Sure.
Had not ever been caught, not ever been diagnosed. They thought I had migraine headaches and was dealing with that. So actually, the Advil was contributing to
it just advanced
the situation.
Yep.
And then also the Imatrix shots that my doctor was giving me, and they believe that was doing more damage than good at that time too. So,
but at one point in my journey, I had these migraine headaches, and I had them for a long time.
Wow.
Before I was transplanted and after I was transplanted, and they used Imitrex, and my kidney function did okay. So but different strokes for different folks. But here's the point I wanted to make. Here along, all of these symptoms are happening to you, right? And you're looking just fine. You're getting along just fine. You get there until you drop off the edge of the cliff, and you're in renal failure. And that's a significant part of this illness. And you always look good. Oh, you look fine, and it's not true. On the inside, you're damaging.
Yeah, that's exactly how it was for us.
Yeah.
Exactly how it was. Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump over the next hurdle, get down the next bump or the next bunny trail, and see about your transplant. When did you get transplanted? What year?
I just get goosebumps when I think about it because it's such a wonderful thing.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. Our transplant took place in 2000, March of 2000. When I was first diagnosed with end-stage renal disease in 97, they did tell me there was no going back. They said, you are going to need a transplant. And of course, for us, that was just like, it was just so unbelievable because I was a person who had nothing. I had not been in a hospital other than for the birth of my 3 children, nothing. I was, and anyway, it was a little hard to believe. It really, really was. And we asked the nephrologist here in Grand Forks if we could get a second opinion. And so we went down to, he preferred that we go to Hennepin Medical Center in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
And he knew a physician there that he would refer us to, that we could get a second look at. And that was, she was wonderful. She probably spent 2 hours in her office just talking to my husband and I, but basically told us the same thing.
Yeah.
You are going to need a transplant.
Did they ever talk to you about dialysis?
At that point, they didn't. No.
Okay, that's significant.
Actually, when I was, when I got off the Advil, my kidney function bounced back up to about 30%. He was able to get the blood pressure under control, bounce back up. But I was very sick. So anyway, we went down and saw her and she said, no, you're going to need a transplant. And so we went through the process of getting on the list through the Hennepin Medical Center in Minneapolis. And we were told that I'm an O blood type, that the wait would be about 5 years. And at that point, they did send me home with a pager. They said, carry this with you all the time, blah, 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 blah. We had no one at that time that was my blood type and that could give a kidney. And so we just thought, okay, well, in the big scheme of things, 5 years, we can do this. It's okay. In the meantime, a friend of mine called one day and she said, you need to talk to physicians at the Mayo Clinic. And she had heard a radio interview on public radio with a physician from Mayo, a nephrologist. And he was talking about a new procedure that they were doing at the Mayo Clinic, an ABO incompatible. And they were having very good success with everything they had done with researching. And she, this friend said, you really need to call Mayo and talk to them. And so I made a cold call to Mayo and got a hold of somebody in the transplant center. And she said, well, I will have Dr. Bloor call you back. And sure enough, it wasn't even an hour. And he called back and we probably visited for a good 2 hours on the phone that day. He took tons of history, did everything. He said, would you like to come down and have a consult? And well, yes, and he explained the ABO incompatible. My husband, of course, was jumping at the chance. He's a type A. And so my husband did a whole bunch of his workup stuff here in Grand Forks before we went down
Sure.
to the Mayo Clinic. And so I still remember the day that we were at Mayo, and the day that we heard that they believed that Keith would be a great donor for me was Valentine's Day. And we thought that was so neat, so meaningful that it happened on Valentine's Day. And so with his A blood type and my O, they were very certain that we would be a very good match. They sent some of our blood off to do all of a sudden my mind went blank here. Tissue typing would it be?
Yeah, tissue typing. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And about a week and a half later, we found out that it was good. And they said, if you feel good about this, we can schedule. And so we did. We scheduled, and our transplant took place on March 20th. So actually, from that time that we found out, February 14th, it was great because it was just a month. We
just
scheduled
like that
transplant, and it was good. I think we were the third or fourth couple that they did the ABO incompatible procedure on. And people will ask us, weren't you really worried about that? You were being guinea pigs. And our thing is, no. We know what Mayo Clinic is all about. We trust Mayo Clinic. They're not going to just try something to try it. This had been well researched, and they knew exactly what they were doing. And here we are 21 years later. And
that was my next question. 21 years.
21
Amazing.
years. And I actually bargained with God. Imagine that. I bargained with God when I first got sick.
What'd you give up?
I said, I just want a year. Just give me one good year after transplant. That's all I want. Because I really didn't know how this was all going to play out. And part of it too with me was I don't believe that I was given enough really thorough information when I first was diagnosed. I was told I'd need a transplant. To me, that was almost a death sentence. And I really thought I was leaving these 3 young children. My husband believed, he really was scared too. He thought he was going to be a single dad when I was so sick. And I think it's so important that physicians and nurses just really talk through some of this with people. And especially in my situation where I had never really had anything else physically wrong with me.
That you knew of.
Exactly. It was all being thrown at us.
That's right.
And
anyway. You're exactly right. That's what needs to happen. And thank God there's folks like you and me that can pass this information along. Because the people that are out there that are listening, they think, gee, I have some of these symptoms. And, then when you get there to the doctor, a lot of them just say, well, whatever the doc says, I'm going to go on ahead. You really have to start thinking about it early on about what you need to know. And if you have kidney disease, you have to know everything you can possibly know.
Right. And being your own, you have to be your own best advocate and really ask a ton. I kept, and I still have them, I have journals of every day when this all first began, of everything that occurred every single day once I was diagnosed. And I know I'm probably that over the top type A personality, but I just wanted to make sure that I had everything documented so that if we needed any kind of information, I could look back. And for me, that was very beneficial. I had to do it.
AAKP, or the American Association of Kidney Patients, is the oldest and largest independent kidney patient organization in the United States. It is dedicated to improving the lives and long-term outcomes of kidney patients through education, advocacy, patient engagement, and the fostering of patient communities. AAKP fights for early disease detection and the appropriate diagnosis of rare genetic conditions, increased kidney transplantation, and preemptive transplantation, full patient choice of either in-center or home dialysis, protection of the patient-physician relationship, promotion of research and innovation, including artificial, implantable, and wearable kidneys, and the elimination of barriers for patient access to available treatment options. To join, go to aakp.org. See, I missed the boat here. I forgot or whatever. And I know we talked about your husband being your donor. And eventually what we'll do, we're going to come back. I'm going to have a panel of got several. If you go back and listen to the podcast, I've got a couple people on there that did the same thing. Wife gave to the husband, or husband gave to the wife.
Oh,
And
that's so cool.
yeah. And I want to get everybody together, kind of like have a, just a round table. And that's what we'll do.
Would love to be a part of that. Yes.
You said, I went through similar things too, but fortunately I had a physician. Once he diagnosed me, he took me in hand and said, listen, this is how we're going to do this. We have to do this because you're not going to do dialysis very well. It's not going to work for you. So yeah. And you're right. At some point in time, people, they say, let's diagnose earlier. Well, you don't always get an early diagnosis. Very, very few people get a quote early diagnosis. And in our case, you're in my case, if you go back and look, you probably had protein in your urine early on. I know I did. Sure. Yep. See, and I wanted to hear, I wanted people to know that if your urine has protein in it, it's not a let's wait and see, it's time to get busy.
Right.
That's right. And you've been given that information, had you known when you could say, well, why is that protein in my urine? It's not supposed to be there, is it, Doc? Well, no, usually it's a sign of kidney disease. And you think,
that's right.
See, and that's exactly what it's a sign of. So then you can put two and two together, and the physician can say, even if he's a GP, we need to check this out.
Right.
Do you feel you're comfortable with that idea that once you've had that protein in the urine, now's the time to act?
Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah, and that was just so missed with
me. Oh, yes. But we can't go back. We're here today doing what we're doing because you feel it's important for you to get your story out. You've done that. And you've come up with some very valuable information to people who will listen to this. And you can't spend time worrying about what you have. You got to spend time worrying about what you can do about it.
And that's exactly right. Exactly. Yeah. And, I feel so good that I forget that this transplant is a therapy, that it isn't a cure. I just feel so good. And I mentioned my terrible headaches. I seriously have not had a headache like that in 21 years since this all took place. I've not had a bad headache. So it obviously, again, wasn't migraine headaches that we were dealing with. It was
kidney disease.
It was kidney.
Yes. Yeah. And that's okay. I mean, you got to look back in this because people don't learn anything from this unless they know that this stuff happens.
Right.
And so you've done a great service back to all people out there that are listening. If they've got these kinds of symptoms, and you've got protein in your urine, something's got to give. And you don't want to wait another 5, 6 years or 7 years to watch it. Watching it doesn't do you any good. Waiting doesn't do you any good.
No.
And if you go back and you track your blood pressure, my opinion, your blood pressure probably was elevated over that period of time. Not grossly elevated like 200 over 110, but it could have been 140 over 100, or it could have been 130 over 90 early on. And that's another sign.
Mine was more in that 200 range.
At the end.
And I think it probably had been for a while with those headaches, you know,
Sure,
too. That could have been a
absolutely.
contributor. And we just didn't know. Again, like you mentioned, looked okay on the outside.
That's right.
On the outside, but
I'm moving on down the road. I'm looking fine. I'm feeling fine, except for these damn headaches. Excuse the language, but it's my
That's
podcast.
right.
So when you have headaches, they're not normal. There's a reason for it, right?
Exactly.
When you have swollen feet, there's a reason for it. And if you match those up, if you could go back, I went back and looked. I had protein in my urine in 1970. And I was transplanted in 1987.
Wow.
17 years. And I had moderately increasing blood pressure all along. 130 over 90, 130 over 90, 140 over 90, 140 over 100. And then eventually I got to 200 over 110, and I was in a hypertensive crisis, just like you. Just like you.
Yeah, our stories are very similar.
Yes, exactly. But that's FSGS. That's primary FSGS. And after we're talking, I want to talk with you a little bit about that. You know what? Let me just look real quick because I want to make sure. Before you did this, what was your biggest fear about transplant? Even knowing that what was your biggest fear? Because you didn't face dialysis, you're going for a transplant, which we call preemptive, which is great.
Actually, I had 6 months of dialysis.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Prior to transplant. Yep.
Okay.
They just decided that things were going a little bit down and wanted to make sure they were proactive in that.
Not a problem.
I did peritoneal dialysis at home for about 6 months, and that worked very well for me. My nephrologist did not want to do hemodialysis on me. And I'm glad he chose what he chose because it worked beautifully for me. And again, he knew my personality and that I could be, well, let's say rigid enough to make sure that was being done well at home. And I wasn't going to just not do it. And I was going to follow the rules and everything. So anyway, the biggest thing about transplant for us, I would have to say, my fear was that I had these 3 young children. I had a little girl in 1st grade and sons that were in 9th and 10th grade, 10th and 11th grade, 10th and 11th. And those are young kids. And to have both myself and their father going into surgery together.
Oh, wow. Oh, yes.
Was the scariest for me. So of course we made sure we talked to a lot of people prior to going for surgery about the care of our children, who would be best to care for our children, and stuff like that was just so heavy mentally on me, especially. So that was my biggest fear. Another thing that kind of caught my husband was, let's see, I think it was prior to when we were having some meetings at Mayo. One of the nurse practitioners was meeting with us and said, these are some of the side effects, blah, blah, blah. And she said, and I'm just going to tell you that our average patient will usually gain about 30 pounds. And of course, for somebody who's very physically active, and I've always been very, very health conscious of what food I put into my body, I just thought, oh my gosh, this is terrible. And my husband was looking at me and winking, kind of like, no, this is you. This is where you're going to get this. But here's what I found out about that. I think that some people decide that when they've been transplanted, they can't do anything. And they have to kind of just
sit back.
Veg. Well, if you are just going to sit back and veg, you are going to gain weight.
Yep.
And then I also think, and I talked to my doctor about this, and he said that's a huge, huge factor. Some people that, because they've been denied foods when they have been on dialysis, they decide when they're transplanted, woohoo, I can eat
Anything
whatever
I want.
I want now. And he said that's our biggest deal. And so, yes, when we say that our patients gain weight, he said those are a couple of things that you can control. He said, now, might you gain some weight with the meds?
Sure.
You might. He said, but the other things you can control. And, you know, I found that to be exactly true.
Absolutely.
You
Absolutely.
don't have to gain 30 to 40 pounds. It's just not the way it is.
Speaking of medications, Beck, what are you on? What have you been on the whole time?
You know, again, I thank Mayo because they brought me down on prednisone so quickly. And
Sure.
that time that I was there.
Yeah.
I have 5 milligrams prednisone. I take mycophenolate.
Okay.
And that is a 250 milligram capsule. I take 2 in the morning and 1 in the evening. And then I'm also on sirolimus, the Rapamune, and that is 3.5 milligrams a day.
Okay, so you've been on that pretty religiously all the way through, right? You haven't had to have any adjustments or change in medications?
No, that's been pretty much steady the whole way through.
Okay.
You know, maybe they've tweaked a little bit with the
Sure.
sirolimus. They've gone from 3 to 3.5 milligrams, something like that.
Yeah.
But it's stayed pretty steady the whole time.
Well, I'll tell you what, you're blessed. There's no doubt in my mind you're blessed. And yeah, it's every time that I talk to somebody in these kidney stories, it's something different. There's totally different. Everybody's different. But I'll tell you what, there's one main concern in the whole thing, one main theme in the whole thing, and that is that how you handle it. How are you going to handle your transplant? And how are you going to take care of it? And what are you going to do if it goes south? All right. And that's been on my mind for 30 years. What happens if it goes south? What am I going to do? I'm not anticipating, but it can happen. And I'm sure that's been in your mind too.
Well, actually, I'm on a list again, Kent.
Really?
3 years ago. I think it was 3 years ago when I go to Mayo once a year and do everything there.
Excuse me.
They got a little low reading on my renal function test. And so when we went for our wrap-up meetings after the days of testing, the doctor said, you know, we're going to put you on the list. He said, this is what we're getting for a number right now with you, and that puts you on that list. And he said, we're going to list you as inactive because you're not sick enough to need anything. And of course I'm going, yeah, I don't feel sick at all.
Yeah, right, right.
But they had noticed enough of a decrease in function that they wanted to get on top of this. And it's been interesting because they said, of course, we don't know. You could need a transplant within a year. It could be still 7 or 8 years. You know, you could maintain at this. And I've maintained pretty much around that 28, 29, 30% now for the last 3 years. It hasn't moved.
28 or 29, 30%. And I got to ask you, how old are you?
62. Gosh, I have to stop and think.
Well, that's okay. That's good because I'm 70, almost 72. So there's a 10 years difference here. And yeah. I'm telling you, there are people, you have to face this because you do not know what it's going to do because it's not a cure, like you said.
That's right.
So you have to have that in your bag of tricks. What am I going to do? And you've taken care of that.
Mm-hmm.
At 72 years old, I doubt very much if I'll have a chance at a second transplant if I need it. So consequently, I have thought about it though. Okay. And you know what? You got to. You can't just go oblivious to it because you have to be planning and ready if something happens. So, in your case, you couldn't be in a better place. Oh, I'm sure there's programs, I can't be in a better place right now with the physician I have and, the availability of the transplant program that I'm with. But I can tell you, Mayo is second to none. All right. So I really appreciate you coming on with me today. I can't imagine. I want to have you and your husband on. We're going to do that because I know he played a big part of this, just like my brother did. All right. We don't
and my husband not only, like we said, was the donor, but his mental strength throughout all of this, I could not have done it without him. I could not have done it without him. I remember when we were first diagnosed, when I really thought our world was coming to an end.
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
I had been an elementary teacher and I had to quit teaching. And so I was grieving that because that was so much a part of who I was. And couldn't do it anymore. And I remember, and my husband also was a teacher. Actually, that's how we met. He was my teacher in high school. And so that's another little story. It's just, connected.
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, it's a great story. It's just a great story.
Okay.
But he came home one day and I was crying. I was by myself, the kids were off at school. My husband got to go to school and it had been taken from me. And he said, okay, this is not going to fly anymore. He said, you've got to do something. You cannot sit here and cry.
Yeah.
And I was mad at him. I said, well, this isn't you, and blah. I was
yada,
mad.
yada, yada.
And he said, here's what I want you to do tomorrow. He said, when I'm gone, we laughed because this was like his assignment. He said, I want you to make a list of everything good that has happened with your diagnosis. And of course, that made me more mad. I said,
there's nothing good about this.
That's what I said, Ken. There's nothing good.
You tell me one thing.
And he said, well, you better start looking. He said, because there is good.
Yeah.
And, I was mad. And he went off again the next day to school. And I said, okay, I'm going to see. And I bet I won't come up with a thing. Well, I did. My father came over and had lunch with me every single day.
Wow.
Now, had I been teaching, I
wouldn't have happened.
Been able to have lunch with my father.
Yep.
I got to take my own young daughter to school every morning when I was teaching and my boys were little.
Never happened.
I had to go meet somebody else's kids at the schoolroom door. They went off to school on their own. So you do find that there are good things. There are good things that come out of anything. And sometimes it's not easy to see, but when you start thinking, there is good.
You've given some real hope to people here. I'm hoping that we can get everybody that's out there to pass this along and let them listen to this. I asked that to happen. We're going to wrap it up here today because I know we got things to do, but we're going to have you and your husband back, and we're going to do a chat just about that, because I don't know where I'd be without my wife of 51 years. There's no way possible that I could have done that. And that's not lost on anybody. If you have to go this alone, don't do that. You got to have a mentor. You can't, if you're alone, like my group at Kidney Solutions, we're always available. There's somebody, we can get somebody that you can chat with or mentor with that can help you. So don't go away thinking that you have to do this alone. You don't. All right. We're very fortunate to have a family, and for that I'm honored. And I appreciate you coming on, Beck.
It was my pleasure. We look forward to more visits. Thank you.
We're gonna do it. Okay, folks, listen. I'm glad that we did this because there's a story here, and everybody's story is very important. But the most important thing about it is that if you think you have kidney disease, if you have any questions at all, you can call us at Kidney Solutions, or just get with your doctor and just mention to him the fact that this is not right. Something's not going on. Know your numbers, know your urinalysis, know your blood pressure, know about what's going on with your body. If you don't know, nobody else will. You've got to be the person that brings it up, and then you got to follow up on it. So all of this we keep in mind because this kidney disease is not good. It's not good at all. It's not good for you. It's not good for your family. And I'll be honest with you, it can kill you. So in the meantime, until we get to see each other again, take care of your symptoms and get a diagnosis. And once you do, call us. So until next time, keep breathing.